This video is explaining the information processing model of memory, which is currently the most widely accepted explanation of how our memory works. And it's also most scientifically backed as far as the different theories go. But this is pretty much the most accepted explanation of how our memory works. And I do want to say, if it's a little staticky, sorry, I'm using the headphones that I have available to me right now, so thanks for bearing with the staticky sound. So if we think back to the beginning of the semester, this comes from the cognitive approach, and they believed our minds worked like computers. So as we go through what this theory is, kind of think about the similarities and differences between how computer memory works. So the first thing we're going to do is a bit of a brainstorm. So when I say so, you're going to pause the video, do some brainstorming about your earliest memory and a memory that has had a lasting effect on you. And we will come back to these ideas later at another time. So go ahead and pause, continue when you're done with your brainstorm. So now we're going to look at the actual model of memory, and we're going to use this graphic as a way to outline how memory works, and we're going to fill in a section at a time. So you've got a blank version. I'm starting with a blank version, and we're going to add to it as we go. So according to this theory, the first step in the process of making a memory is sensory input. And actually that capacity thing is in the wrong spot, so ignore that. That shouldn't be there. So you're going to fill in just sensory input and forgotten. So all around us every day is all kinds of sensory input. The things we see, touch, hear, smell, say, all this information that we take in. And there's research that says now, currently it's 2017, that the amount of information we take in a day is the equivalent to reading 85 newspapers cover to cover. That's a ton of information, and we cannot possibly retain it all. So a lot of it gets forgotten because we just couldn't take it all in, and it's not all important. Our brain filters out what's not important. So those side conversations that you hear, usually you don't remember them. You hear them at the moment, but they get forgotten because you can't keep it all going at the same time. So if you pay attention to that information, it goes to your short-term memory. So now here's where the capacity duration should be. So short-term memory, people tend to get this explanation a little bit confused because really you can only remember a very limited amount of information. And I've tried to represent with the size of the boxes the comparative amount of information you retain in that stage. So short-term memory really lasts up to 3 seconds only. And you can only keep, 3 to 7 if you've got a really great short-term memory at one time. And again, a lot of that information gets forgotten because you can't keep all that information going forever. I mean, there's just no way. So your brain filters out, what do I need to remember? What is important? So again, we have attention. So first, there's all that sensory information. Your brain is deciding, okay, what do I need to keep? What can I ignore? Then we go to short-term memory. Then you're doing some more filtering of deciding, okay, this is really important. Now it needs to go to working memory. And this is really the thing that people think of when they're talking about, oh, I have a terrible short-term memory, or oh, I have a great short-term memory. Usually people say they have a bad short-term memory. They really mean their working memory. And try to think of this as like your work desk. So on your desk, if you're like me, you've got a few projects going at once. You maybe have like a to-do list, some documents open on your computer, some tabs open, something else on maybe a book on your desk. You've got a few things going at one time. But you can't have 20 projects going at once. You'll never finish. So you've got to be very selective about the amount of things that you've got going at one time to make sure that they get done. That's kind of what this 5 to 7 units is. You can only have a few things going at once. And working memory is still pretty limited. It only lasts for about 10 seconds, or else it'll get forgotten. Unless you rehearse it. And that can kind of keep it in that working memory for a little bit longer. And there are several different ways that you can rehearse. But the most common one that people use is repetition. If you can kind of repeat something to yourself, you'll be able to keep track of it for long enough for when you need to use it. But it still doesn't stick around forever. So today, you can just Google a phone number. But what people used to have to do, like if they wanted to, say, order a pizza or call somebody, call or a repairman or make an appointment, between the time where they looked up the number in the phone book, the paper phone book, and dialed the phone, you repeated that number to yourself over and over and over, just long enough that you're able to dial it and make your pizza order. But once you have made your order, you forget that phone number, unless you call there all the time. Then, if you call that phone number all the time, it has been encoded, and now it's in long-term memory. So long-term memory has an infinite capacity. That's why it's the biggest box. And its duration is permanent. So if some type of input has made it all the way to long-term memory, it's there forever. It has been encoded. So you notice there's no arrow coming off of long-term memory that says forgotten. That doesn't mean that you can at an instant recall everything you've ever stored in long-term memory. But that is because there's a problem with retrieval. And we'll go more in detail about different strategies for encoding, different strategies for retrieval, but just for now, this is to give you a little overview into just the basics of how this model works. So, one more time, you have some sensory input. Let's pretend that your brain decides this is important information and pays attention to it. Now it's in your short-term memory. And you have to decide, okay, can I forget this? Or, nope, do I need more attention? So if it's something really important, like let's say someone's calling out your name and they're asking you a question, you need to be able to process that information. So you think of the question, you give the answer. If it's not maybe an important thing, like if they're just asking you a yes or no question, you're probably going to forget it. But let's say they're asking you to do something. You might rehearse it and say, oh, let's say your mom asked you to pick up milk. You might just rehearse it all the way on their drive home. Pick up milk, pick up milk, pick up milk, pick up milk. And then once you get it, it's gone. Or they may ask you something that's got more of a long-term need. So they might ask you, hey, remember you need to buy your sister a birthday present. You need to think about what you want to get her because it's about a month away. So then you might encode it because it's far enough away that if you only rehearse it, that's not going to fulfill your need. So you encode it, and again, we'll talk about different ways to do that, and it's there, okay? So sometimes, though, when you have a problem with retrieval, that would be like in school. So let's say you're in psychology class, and your teacher is teaching you about memory. You're like, oh, I know this is important. I need to remember it. So you're kind of thinking about it at the time. Now you're trying to rehearse it. You write it down. You think about it. You are studying. And we'll talk about some study tips. You study that information because you know it's important and you're going to be asked to retrieve it. You encode it, and it's in that long-term memory. But when you go to take your weekly quiz, you're having a problem with retrieval. You can't remember it. It's there. You just can't get it out. So we will again go into more rehearsal strategies because sometimes that's the most useful way to remember something. We'll go over encoding strategies because like we said, sometimes you need to remember information for a long amount of time. We'll also go into retrieval strategies because there are ways to get that information out if you can't remember it at first. So check back later for more information on our class site for details about the IP model. And I will see you next time.